Hello and welcome back. In this module, we're going to talk about Amazon Inspector. So we'll go over what is Amazon Inspector, and then we'll talk about some of the features of the Inspector and how it performs assessments of your environment. So what is Amazon Inspector? Well, it's a service in AWS that tests the network accessibility of EC2 instances and the security state of the applications that run on those EC2 instances. And it assesses applications for exposure, vulnerabilities, and deviations from best practices. So you have your EC2 instances, you have the applications that run on your EC2 instances, and then you have the network that connects your EC2 instances with your other services within your environment. Inspector inspects all of that. And so once Inspector completes an assessment, it creates a detailed list of security findings, which are organized by level of severity. And you can use Inspector to automate security vulnerability assessments throughout your development and deployment pipelines, as well as on static production systems. So it's a great tool to inject security testing throughout your development lifecycle. And it makes security testing part of all development and IT operations if you use it correctly. And one of the key things to remember for the exam, it has an agent that you install on the operating system of EC2 instances that you want to assess. If you're just performing network assessment, you don't need the agent. But as soon as you start doing host assessment and application assessment running on those hosts, you need to have the agent installed on any of those hosts, meaning EC2 instances. And the agent monitors EC2 instance behavior, including network, file system, and process activity, collecting a wide set of behavior and configuration data, which is called telemetry. And here we show an example of EC2 instances running with the Inspector agent running on them, delivering data to Inspector, which then produces findings. So let's talk about the Inspector assessments. So in order to cover this, I've captured an image from the configuration of Amazon Inspector in my account. And so Inspector assessments check for security exposures and vulnerabilities in your EC2 instances and in your network. And what you do when you want to set up your assessments, you can select network assessments or host assessments or both. And you can see here I have selected both. And what you do is you use these options to, one, test your network. So the network assessment performs network configuration analysis and checks for ports reachable from outside the VPC to make sure that you understand which ports are reachable from outside the VPC. Now you might want to have port 80 reachable from outside the VPC if you have a web application server running, but what if you have other ports accessible from outside the VPC, such as port 22 for SSH and other ports similar to that you would not want to have exposed? Well, a network assessment using Inspector would tell you that in the assessment results. So for network assessments, you don't have to have the agent installed. But if you want to test for ports reachable on your EC2 instances, you need to have the Inspector agent installed on those EC2 instances, of course. And sometimes you get pricing questions on the exam. Pricing for Inspector network assessments is based on the monthly volume of instance assessments, where an instance assessment is a successful assessment of an instance. And they give an example here. For 100 instances assessed weekly, the monthly cost would be around $61. Now for host assessments, you have to install the agent on the host or the EC2 instance. And the host assessments perform vulnerability software, or CVE, host hardening, or CIS benchmarks, and security best practices. So it assesses those things. And this type of assessment requires an agent installed on your EC2 instances. And if you create your EC2 instances that allow System Manager Run command, the agent will be installed automatically. Another thing to remember for the exam. So System Manager Run command is a capability that you can install on your EC2 instances, and that brings along with it the inspector agent. And pricing for host assessments is based on the monthly volume of agent assessments, where an agent assessment denotes a successful assessment of an instance. And they give the example, if you have 100 instances assessed weekly, the monthly cost would be around $120 a month. So have a general idea of the cost of inspector going into the exam, and definitely know the difference between a network assessment and a host assessment. All right, finally, let's go over the inspector features. So, inspector is a configuration scanning and activity monitoring engine that analyzes system and resource configuration, and the agent plays a major part in that for your EC2 instances. And it has a built-in library of rules and reports that include detailed recommended steps for resolving potential security issues found through the assessment. And we show that here in a screenshot from building out an inspector configuration. Under the Define Assessment template, you can see that we have rule packages that we're going to use. We're going to use the network reachability package, the security best practices, the common vulnerabilities and exposures, and the CIS operating system security configuration benchmarks. So remember these rules. These are the rules packages that are available to you. You want to know these rules packages because you might get a question on the exam that tries to see if you understand what are the rules packages that you can use in Inspector. And Inspector can be fully automated through an API that allows for the incorporation of security testing into the development and design process of your application development teams, including selecting, executing, and reporting the results of those tests. And another great thing about Inspector, you can access the Inspector service programmatically by using the Inspector HTTPS API. So you can issue HTTPS requests directly to the service. And you can use those requests in your application development and in your infrastructure as code throughout your development lifecycle. Okay, so that's a detailed look at Amazon Inspector. In our next module, we'll do a lab using Amazon Inspector to further solidify your knowledge of this service. So if you have the time, please join me in that next lecture. Thank you.
For more details, check the link in the description. Learn with Whizlabs. Success certified.